welcome back, everyone. I hope you were able to enjoy a little bit of break in between our sessions. We've got a really exciting one today with enCore Energy. Like we've been saying this throughout this whole day, please, we'd love to see, throw the city that you're in or the province or state into the chat room. We'd love to see where everyone's coming in from, but also in the Q&A function. If you have any questions, maybe you had questions even before this even began or throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. Our team here would love to answer them. So please put them in there and we'll get to that after the presentations for about 25 minutes or so. Once that concludes, we'll get to all of the questions. But enough of myself. We're going to be handing it over to Paul Goranson and William Sheriff to take us through the presentation of enCore Energy. Gentlemen, I'll pass it over to yourselves now.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it. Welcome to a presentation on enCore Energy. We're a domestically focused in situ recovery uranium company. It's been a very interesting decade of not much happening in the uranium industry after Fukushima, but our company has really come into its own here with the transaction. We announced a transformational transaction in September whereby the company is acquiring two production assets in terms of licensed ISR plants in Texas. And shortly after that, the announcement of Paul Goranson, who joins me today on the presentation as our CEO, to lead the company through what we think is going to be a very, very exciting next 4 or 5 years. Just by way of a bit of background, enCore Energy was really born out of Energy Metals Corp, which was a successful uranium company in the 2004 to 2008 timeframe, where we put together the U.S.'s largest historic resource base in uranium and advanced a number of projects towards production, as well as, importantly, a very familiar kickoff. The first transaction we did in Energy Metals was purchasing the Hobson ISR plant in South Texas, essentially bulldozing it and rebuilding it. In the uranium business, at least in the United States, we think if you don't have a production license or a means of production, that it severely limits your potential and your future. And so that was one of our key asset acquisitions before and as well this time. We have waited because we thought the uranium price was going to stay down for some time. We've unfortunately been right for the better part of a decade on that. We do see some signs of firming. We think we're probably 18 months out in terms of a real big price increase, but if you were around for any of the previous uranium episodes, you know you have to be on board before the price goes up. It's a pretty small market, and it will leave the station without you for sure. So we think that we're right at the beginning, somewhere around the same time frame as 2004 in the last cycle. And it's an excellent time to become very aggressive and build the next uranium platform, and that's exactly what we've done. So moving through the slides here, this is the one that says don't believe anything I tell you from here on. Not exactly, but the usual standard disclaimer. Here you can see our clear focus now after our transformational transaction, which we expect to close by year end, incidentally. It is a binding letter of commitment, so not a lot of risk involved there. But our focus and strategy and asset base have been created to become a premier uranium production company in the United States, strictly through the in situ process. And that's where, when we get to our staff, and indeed when Paul takes over, you'll understand we've got a great deal of expertise in that arena. As mentioned before, we're highlighted by 2 licensed production processing plants in Texas. We do have 43101 resources that are quite extensive in New Mexico, as well as historic resources in Texas, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, as well as New Mexico. So very strong asset base. Most of those historic resources were done by name brand oil companies back in the 70s, such companies as Conoco, Texaco, Exxon, Mobil, lots of companies that are household names in the industry. So good quality database. In fact, we have one of the world's largest databases on uranium. And here again, it just boils down to the team more than the assets. I'd put our team up against any team in the business. The nuclear fuel cycle is a lot more than just the production of uranium. It involves exploration, production, permitting. Permitting is huge. And then, of course, once you're into production, it involves conversion, enrichment, fabrication, and ultimately reclamation. And throw in there after the production, the marketing as well with the utilities. And we're one of the few companies short of the majors that actually has a complete team with excellent competence in every one of those fields. So quite happy with that. And most of the team's also one that was together with Energy Metals and Uranium One, and augmented it with a few very strong additions, such as Paul. Again, we think you're going to see the industry improve considerably. There have been a number of reasons to do that, so I'll just kind of come back and let Paul address some of the specifics, but I want to cover some of the corporate things. We have a market cap of about 64 million right now. We're just wrapping up a financing that's set to close Thursday morning, which will see the company add another $4 million, $4.8 million to the treasury. Give us about $7.5 million in the treasury. We are to receive another $3 million US cash upon closing of the transaction with WestWater. You can see here our number of shares out, 160 million. That'll go up by 12 million, so 172 later this week. And key shareholders, you can see we've got about a 40% institutional range, about a 40% retail, and the rest is made up of primarily insiders. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this other than to mention a few people. Paul, of course, has operated, I think, the majority of the ISL plants in the U.S. over the course of the last 20 years. Formerly president of Cameco, chief operating officer of Energy Fuels, just a great depth of experience in terms of ISR. And then we've also got Dennis Stover, who's our chief technical officer, and who just stepped down to make room for Paul coming in as our CEO. Dennis had been at the helm for the last decade, and he's one of the original patent holders on the in situ process. So and has a number of patents to his credit on that. Richard Cherry has been deeply involved on all sides, having formerly been the leader of the General Atomics Group, and has a great deal of depth in terms of dealing contracts with the nuclear utilities. In fact, he'd done some of that with Energy Metals for us in a previous company. Mark Paliza comes to us from Uranium Resources, which later became WestWater. Got 40 years in the industry. Bill Harris, our outside director, independent director, and audit chairs, formerly CEO of Hoist Fibers, $5 billion company. We have a long association, and moving towards the U.S. listing at some point here with an upscaled listing from our OTCQB. We'll be needing to look at Sarbanes-Oxley compliance as a U.S. reporting issuer, and Bill brings us the strength on audit for that. Nate Tewalt, our other director, came to us with Standard Uranium's acquisition back in the previous cycle, where we acquired Hobson, and Dennis Stover joined the group as well. So Nate's got quite a wealth of experience in this. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Doug Underhill certainly worth mentioning. Spent most of his career with IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, of late anyway, after about 30 years in the industry, our chief geologist. And as you can see, we've got a well-rounded field, as I say, experts in every aspect of the business. So in Texas, we do have the 2 production facilities. New Mexico is a very interesting long-term part of our strategy. We've got over 90 million pounds of historic resources, over 30 million pounds of 43-101 established resources. And I think equally importantly, we've got 468 square miles of mineral rights that we pay essentially nothing on a yearly basis. There's no holding cost. And that is every other section through the richest uranium district in the United States, that being the Grants Mineral Belt, which has had the not only the highest number of pounds produced, but the some of the richest ore bodies, and very, very long history of production. So as many people are probably aware, New Mexico hasn't seen production for a number of years, and this is largely due to the Navajo Nation issue and the way the companies have treated the First Nations or the Navajo, whichever side of the border you're looking at this from. We don't view this as a significant impediment. It's just, quite frankly, we think it's an asset, because we'll need lots of workers, and we'll need support from the community. So we view it as a long-term goal. It's going to take 4 or 5 years to mend the fences. We've got a very good track record of doing this in the Yukon and a gold company. And it's not that complicated. It's a good neighbor philosophy. We have to create deals and equity participation such that the First Nations or the Navajo want us there, and it's not any different than moving into a neighborhood of different people in a city. You have to make yourself want to be there. You have to make yourself welcome. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. So, we've had companies that have spent 20 years and $30 million trying to sue their way into production. And litigation is not the right way to go. There's a number of examples of how to work together. Most famously, perhaps, is the Tyson-Majetic joint venture in Canada that's served Cameco incredibly well, served the Majetic First Nation very well, and created a $100 million a year revenue company out of a $1 million seed probably a decade ago. So, and provided them some equity. So it's a very, very lucrative place to be, controlling every other section through the district, in addition to the resources that we have known. So long term, a big part of our strategy. But the next few years will be highlighted by our efforts in the in situ. We do have some non-core assets that we'll be leveraging into improving our position in the in situ field. Texas, I'm going to leave this largely for Paul to discuss. It's certainly his area of expertise. Spent a lot of time there, but it's certainly one of the premier areas. This is a picture of the Rosita plant. It's in very good shape. One of the things we'll be doing is returning it to production ready status over the course of the next few months, or next 12 months rather. It's an 800,000 pound a year facility. There are possibilities of combining the two facilities, making this one bigger. Lots of things on the drawing board, and as the market develops, we'll be making those decisions. But with the two plants and Rosita being in such good shape, it puts us in a great position. And it's set up for feed from multiple satellite operations, which here again in Texas is a great asset for us. New Mexico, I think I've already exhausted that subject pretty well. You can see here the light blue and green and purple checkerboard showing every other section of land throughout most of the uranium belt. In addition, we have the Marquez and Juan Tafoya deposits a bit further east in lime green and red. These are on Spanish land grants, so it's private land, and the permitting is expected to be easier there than perhaps anywhere else. Here we've got the resource at Husta Butte and Crown Point. Here again, 43101 have combined a little over 30 million pounds, 26 of that in the indicated category. At 0.105, which is actually a very good grade for in situ, and Paul can discuss that a bit more as well, but it's certainly as high grade as many of the operating in situ mines, and higher than a good number of them. Now this is a look at the Juan Tafoya Marquez deposit. I just mentioned it. It's got total inferred historic resource. Now these were 43101s that were done within the last decade, but prior to our ownership. And as you can see, it's a 20 million pound deposit as well. Parts of it are thought to be amenable to ISR. We'll have to do a bit more work on that. But great deal of work has been done on all of these projects in the past. Here you can see the Nose Rock project. Again, this is one of the largest deposits in the U.S. You can see the historic resources that are on this. Over 3,000 drill holes completed on this, which is fairly typical for these deposits in New Mexico, just huge databases. This one was primarily done by Phillips Petroleum. So again, the historic resources, while they're not 43101 and more work has to be done to upgrade them to 43101, they're certainly done by competent people and big name companies. Just another example, West Largo, very, very large resource. And a good number of these deposits we had pieces of before, but with the WestWater acquisition, it consolidates our holding and consolidates deposits, which will mean a whole lot greater efficiency. And here you can see the Ambrosia Lake resource. And this is a compilation of all the resources, historic and 43101, with the appropriate disclaimers for the entire company at this moment. And I'd mentioned databases earlier. We've got a huge database. We've got the worldwide collection of Union Carbide, which was formerly a monster in the business, U.S. Smelting, UV Industries, Ranchers, Exploration and Development, Atlas Minerals, Mediment and Vein. So Add that with the WestWater acquisition of data, and it truly is one of the largest uranium data collections in the world. And in the U.S., of course, that's proprietary data that is not shared with anyone, and quite a valuable tool. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars of work has gone into that. So where are we? What do we plan to be doing? Clear goal to become the premier uranium production company in the U.S., at least in terms of the in situ field. There's a strong need for consolidation in the in situ field in the U.S. There's a number of small producers or production ready companies, and to get the leverage in the business and to deal with the utilities, it would just be aside from operationally more efficient, it would be a lot stronger bargaining position as more of these can be brought under common control. Obviously, the strong team I mentioned, great asset. The 2 uranium production facilities in Texas, existing 4301 compliant resources in New Mexico, leading land position in the New Mexico, and a solid growth plan. I'm going to let you know now, I think I've already mentioned the fact we've got $7 million, a little over $7 million in the bank, and expect to get $3 million cash on closing US with the WestWater transaction before the end of the year. So what are we going to do with that? Just in a brief summary, our 2021 objectives are to spend a little less than $1 million, and by the end of 2021, we'll have the Rosita plant up to production ready status. As I mentioned, it has been very well maintained and won't take a great deal of work. The second thing we'll be doing, and spending perhaps more money on this than any other single line item, and that'll be to drill and or acquire resources at a minimum of 4 million pounds as feed for the Rosita plant. And here again, some of this will be upgrading of historic resources, some of it will be delineation, drilling on known trends, and potentially through acquisitions. The third one we'll be looking at is completing significant reclamation on the Kingsville plant. There is a $9 million bond on the WestWater Resources asset package that we're picking up. We expect that to be reduced by work that's already been done. Full details of that can be found in our news releases and filings. But they've been working for several years to reduce that. And with COVID, it slowed down the analysis by the government regulators. But we expect to see that reduced a bit in the next few months. And we'll continue to work on that primarily at the Kingsville plant next year, and expect to get significant bond reduction here again, and write-offs on some of the, or closure documents rather, on some of the outstanding issues. One of the big things we'll be doing, of course, is integrating the WestWater acquisition with our own, and rationalizing the cost structure of the organization, and that should result in significant operational efficiencies. And finally, we'll continue our search for opportunities to consolidate the domestic ISL industry, or ISR industry. We think that's key to building a very strong company that will not only survive but prosper for the coming years and uranium cycle. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul. The one thing I'd mention, I'm not going to go through it, but full bios of all of our staff are included in the appendix, as are some of our non-core assets. And I would encourage you to take a look at those at your leisure. Once again, we could do a whole 30-minute presentation on our staff credentials, so we'll leave it to you to read on it. And with that, Paul, I'd be happy to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to go back a few slides real quick. So if you get dizzy, I apologize. Thanks again. It was exciting to come on board with enCore. If you've read my bio and everything else, I've actually served on the board, so I get to know the people who are running the company very well, and gained a lot of confidence in their ability and vision. And so it's given me a good opportunity to do something beyond just sitting and idly. I see the growth plan, and I feel I have the same kind of feeling about how the market may return with Bill, and our strategy is sound, and I want to make sure we are able to get it executed. I'll start off real quickly. I spent a lot of time in Texas in my career, and just to give you an idea, I actually started with Uranium Resources, and the very first project I worked on was the Kingsville Dome project. I was actually there for the startup and construction and actually the continued development. So we actually went through commissioning and production, et cetera. So it's kind of like returning back to my roots. And then also I had a chance to build and start up and operate Rosita as well. So those are the two production facilities that are coming on. And as I've told folks in the past, it's kind of weird. You think that you go through the industry and the business and you're going to be moving on as you do more and more things. Somehow I come back to my roots, and I'm excited about this. As you can see from the South Texas trend, there's a lot of opportunities. We have one exploration project that's coming on board that looks very interesting, and that's the Butler Ranch here. It looks like a good way to get feed for Rosita as soon as possible. So, and also I have a lot of experience in South Texas. I've worked as far south as Brooks County with various operations. So there's a lot of opportunities there. In fact, the USGS put a report out a couple of years ago where it highlighted the fact that Texas has nearly 300 million pounds of undiscovered resources that could be put into production. Historically, Texas has produced about 78 million pounds of uranium. Historically, most of that's up in the trend near the Butler Ranch. So there's a lot of historic production, but keep in mind, Rosita was a very good production facility located in what's called the Goliad Formation. Click over here. The Goliad Formation is a very prolific producer. I've had experience working with it both at Kingsville Dome, Rosita, and when I worked for Mustana Uranium, and more recently with Energy Fuels, the Alta Mesa project, which is primarily Goliad. We also can't forget that there's the Oakville, which has been a historic producer as well. Sorry, I'm having fun with the drawing tool, so I hope you enjoy it. Where it's been a historic producer, some of the largest production out of Texas came out of the Oakville. So it means that there's a lot of opportunities in the area where we're going to be where we've got properties right now, but also a lot of opportunities, potential exploration targets that are available, that could be made available to us. So we've already started, even though we haven't closed on a WestWater transaction, we're already starting to look to the future and looking at those opportunities and building some potential target lists that could facilitate the future of these new production facilities. The Rosita facility is in very good shape. Got a chance to go. I hadn't been to Rosita since 1997, so although the area hasn't changed much, the plant has been completely refurbished. It's in very good shape. It was done in 2008. Prior to Fukushima, where there's an expectation there's going to be a lot of new production in the South Texas area, where this would be a central processing plant for not only for uranium resources as properties, but also for future toll processing for other third-party producers. Now, obviously, we know that didn't come to pass, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that the ore bodies have disappeared. So we know where those are, and we're going to keep investigating those opportunities going forward. But it's very exciting going forward. The Kingsville Dome facility last operated in 2000, I'm going to say 2011, 2012. And it's in relatively good shape. The difference between Rosita and Kingsville is that Kingsville Dome is only about 10 miles away from the Baffin Bay, which is heavy saltwater area. So as you expect, it doesn't look nearly as neat as Rosita does because it's more dry climate. But it's still a very functioning facility and has been used historically as a central processing plant. Third party actually doing some toll drying there over its history, all the way dating back to 1988. So I feel very confident in these assets. I want to compliment the WestWater team because they have done a tremendous amount of work, and we expect them to do more work as part of this transaction, doing site decommissioning on former well fields, groundwater restoration, so that when we take over, we're going to the liabilities are going to be significantly reduced. As Bill mentioned, that there's an opportunity for a significant bond reduction, and that's principally due to the activity that WestWater's been doing in anticipation of closing on this transaction. So that helps us a lot because we won't have that extra liability coming on when we take over. let's see. Bill really kind of discussed New Mexico properties, but I also have experience out in New Mexico. I worked for URI Hydro Resources on the development of the Crown Point Church Rock properties. So I've gotten a lot of experience in that, so I have a lot of enthusiasm about New Mexico. As Bill mentioned, there's always the regulatory side that creates a challenge. It's not the first time that I've had to go to work on projects that have regulatory challenges, and I think it's very prospective. It's for the future. The grades are really good particularly for in situ recovery, but also we know that they produce. It's not locked up in any kind of difficult geology. A good example is when I worked for Rio Agam, we had the Ambrosia Lake operations, the former mill tailing site, and we were doing just stopes leaching. That's just pumping, injecting water into open stopes and then letting it just flood through the mines. We were producing between 500,000 to 800,000 pounds per year without doing anything more than just moving water. So we know that those formations are very prolific, and those grades are sustainable, and we see that as being our future. But also part of our future as well going forward is that, throughout my career, one of the things become very apparent. When I first started in this business, most uranium operators had small deposits, 1 to 2 million pounds, maybe 500,000 pounds a year of production, but it was relatively small, with most of the big production coming out of Canada and other countries because of the big open pits, et cetera. But that's changing now, as we've seen with the Kazakhstan model, where basically getting a lot of production facilities in place, or more than one, is what you need to sustain a company. And so, as Bill mentioned, we believe that there's a future consolidation of the industry as a means for making a stronger company, ability to be able to deliver product to the customers, and be more sustainable as a company by optimizing cost and focusing on delivering results. With that, it's about half an hour we're at now, so I think we can just turn it over to Q&A.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of minutes left for that.
Yeah.
The other thing I would encourage you, there probably won't be time. I see there are a lot of questions that have come in. Please feel free to email us at info@encoreenergycorp.com. It's on our presentation and website, and we'll be able to answer every single question via email if we don't get to it.
Beautiful. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate it. And I believe in us. We've got some time here. I think we can get through these ones. It's if it sparks new questions as we're going, then absolutely.
Sure.
We've got there to turn afterwards. But I appreciate it very much, gentlemen, for going through this in great detail as well. But why don't we just jump into the very first question here, and we'll see how many we can get through before our time is up here. That first question is, why have more people not heard about uranium in Texas?
It's a good question, Paul. I'll leave that one up to you.
Yeah, it is a good question. It's the reason why a lot of people haven't heard about uranium, because it's not one of the big production districts. So you've got Wyoming and New Mexico and Utah, which have been historic production districts. But the Texas ones have been noted by their low cost, but also their more friendly regulatory environment. But it's just been kind of I like to call it the uranium industry secret out there. The deposits are very good, but one of the challenges always is that in Texas you don't have a lot of federal lands, and so that means that just going out and filing claims and picking up large property positions that you would see in most of the western states, you don't see in Texas, simply because you have to go and negotiate for leases. And that's changed the philosophy in South Texas to where most companies are looking at larger leases with larger opportunities for larger deposits. And I think you'll see Texas becoming more and more prominent as the uranium industry returns as a result of these are anticipated market conditions, and it'll become one of the more favored places to be. It's just kind of it's not been a highlighted one because it's not been noted by a large amount of production. And also, there's not a lot of big companies working there. So, in Wyoming, you've got Cameco, which has been a big company, and historically in New Mexico, you've had Kerr-McGee and others that are out there. But Texas has been more focused by entrepreneurial developers. and some of the oil and gas in the early phases. So it's not been a big mining sector, so to speak, but it's certainly a great place to do business.
Very interesting. Well, we've got a question here specifically to yourself, Bill. We're getting specific with these. Very, very good there. Saying, Bill, are your initial overtures to the Navajo being received well? Can you expand the next steps in the process of mending fences?
Well, I would say yes. They're early on, but typical companies that, first off, a lot of companies don't do the right thing. The few that do tend to go in at the government level and talk to city councils, if you will, tribal councils, these sort of organizations. And while that's important and something you have to do, it's far more important to do the groundwork actually in the community on a one-on-one basis. And that's where we've had demonstrable success in the Yukon and gold, the gold business, and with certain members of our staff. And I don't think it's that big a secret. I think it'll take time. You don't go in and buy trust. You don't write a check to buy trust. You do so by demonstrating your activities and your intentions and your behavior over a great period of time. And in this case, it's not weeks or months, but it's, like I say, it's a 5-year proposition, and I think we'll be quite successful.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. The next question is from Richard. They ask, will some sort of deal or partnership with Laramide be forthcoming, given that they hold the NRC license?
Yeah, and just a little clarification for everybody else, about 2/3 of our Crown Point deposit is licensed under the NRC license that Laramide holds. Interesting long history that I won't get into. If anyone wants to find out, email me or call me and I'll tell you. But used to be both parts of the project were under common ownership, a couple of decades ago. And since then, it's been a cooperative effort to keep those licenses alive through several different owners on each side. And so obviously we're joined somewhat at the hip, or at least at the knee, with WestWater on that Crown Point Hosta Butte project. There have been friendly discussions in terms of working together and cooperating on the license, and eventually somewhere down the road. But quite frankly, it's we want to keep the door open to good relations, but we're still several years away from getting that community acceptance to want us to be there, regardless of what form that is, if it's in a joint venture or if it's one company or the other. But clearly, we'll maintain good relations to the ultimate end goal there.
Absolutely. Our next question here is from Sebastian. Bill, do you think enCore could be the U.S. Kazatomprom? Forgive me, it's the first time I've read that word.
Kazatomprom, yes. Well, it certainly doesn't hurt to dream big. How about a miniature, not even miniature, how about a small version of Kazatomprom? That would be quite nice. Kazatomprom has probably the world's biggest resources in production, and in terms of ISL, certainly out of Kazakhstan. It's the state-run uranium producer there. And so, yes, it's a nice lofty goal to aspire to. If we only become, a third or a half of a Kazatomprom, we'll be quite, our shareholders will be doing, backflips. It'll be so exciting. But, we're certainly going to employ their model of trying to, put it together a dominant position in ISL in the U.S.
Beautiful. And you learn something new every day as well. This next question is from Christopher. Where do you feel U.S. utilities are with their inventories, and when do you feel they'll begin signing long-term contracts in force? Have you been in communication with them about their uranium needs going forward?
Paul,
I'll let you handle that one. You're closer to that
Sure.
end of it.
Well, thanks. Well, the utilities have been basically sitting outside the market pretty much, drawing down inventories and relying on carry trades for more of their short-term or near-term fuel demands. That is starting to change. Now we've got more market certainty with the Russian suspension agreement being signed, so they have a good idea of where things are, and also getting past the Section 232 investigation and getting beyond a nuclear fuel working group discussion. So now we've got more of a better understood playing field with respect to the utilities. I do believe that they're going to be coming back into the market There's and looking to sign long-term contracts. It's hard to say at what volume. They've already started. Some have already started providing RFPs for new contracts. Those are what we call the early movers who are trying to get in while the getting's good, while the prices are still relatively low. But we do expect more and more contracting to occur. I think the reason why we haven't seen any show up since the RSA has come out is now people are waiting to see what the outcomes of the election, and what does that mean? You know, the campaigns have different views on, or similar views on the value of nuclear, but who's going to execute and how is that going to happen? But I do believe that they're going to have to come back into the market. If you look at the more recent 2019 EIA marketing report, those inventories are coming down. They've been drawing down inventories rather than replacing them. Now, granted, they started at much higher levels than in prior, in the last run up in the market, simply because they've got overproduction coming out of Kazakhstan. We do see them drawing those down. It'll be interesting to see what the next 2020 looks like, knowing that they're not buying a lot, and at least certainly not from domestic producers. And with the production cutbacks we've seen around the world, we'll see how that all shakes out. But news like upside coming out, like early this morning, it was announced that BHP was not going to do the expansion of Olympic Dam, even though that may play in some of the base scenarios. It certainly shows that there's very little upside relative to new supply. It tightens that future supply side. So I think it's going to start creating some opportunities, and I think our current strategy we have is set to time well with those opportunities.
Beautiful. This next question comes from Jason. Do you have the full backing of your major institutional shareholders to do further M&A activity? Would you feel comfortable that capital would be available to you to accomplish this?
I'll take that. Yes, I believe so. In fact, the message from our institutional shareholders is loud and clear in terms of the need for consolidation within the in situ end of the industry. We've touched on that several times throughout, but certainly, first off, there's not a lot of uranium institutions out there, at least uranium focused, but I think pretty clearly the ones that are there, I won't say it's unanimous, but a very, very strong majority, and all of them that I've spoken with have indicated, a need and a desire to have a consolidated in situ industry in the U.S., maybe not only one producer, but certainly fewer producers with more capacity and with a much tighter control of costs. There's quite a bit of G&A in the industry in certain companies, and we certainly will increase ours now that we're more active, but we want to stay in the lowest possible spectrum of that, if you will, and keep your cost under control, produce more. It's not a business model unique to uranium, but I think it's certainly compelling with the handful of smaller producers that we have, that some of them link up and get together. And so, yes, I think as long as the business case can be made, the money will be available.
Yeah, well said. This next question asks, how much runway does the current capital raise give the company? And when would you expect to have to go back to the market yet again?
Well, here again, I'll take that. I think the key is we have enough money to obtain to accomplish all of our 2021 goals. So, at this point, you're looking out the next 15 months. Some of that would depend, that certainly you're going to be getting to where you'll need to be looking at some capital 15 months out, perhaps 12 months out. But here again, there's always the wild card of a potential acquisition, be it a single acquisition or some sort of a M&A opportunity. So based on our current plans and those 5 goals I gave for 2021, we're well suited to accomplish those. And hopefully that answers the question.
I believe it does. This next question says, what makes these assets in Texas so compelling?
Wow. And I'll let Paul elaborate, but basically it's, the cost in terms of time and money, both to not only build the processing plants, but to actually permit them. And in terms of time and money is quite significant. So, it's not a step or two ahead, it's a leap ahead. And Paul, you might want to add on to that.
Yeah, I would say also that, having come from various experience in various companies, I've seen where, getting hung up on not being able to get a license through, and there's some examples in the industry itself. This gives us an opportunity to be able to do something. These are licensed facilities with experienced workforces, and also within Texas, getting aquifer exemptions and well field permits for feeding these facilities, and actually getting license amendments are relatively well understood. It's an agreement state. The costs are much lower than, say, a company that was working in a non-agreement state, that is where the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is involved. But you have one-stop shopping effectively with the state of Texas. And so that gives us some advantage. You're experienced. It's not like a uranium deposit is something new for them, or a uranium operation. So I believe it gives us a leg up. It gives us an opportunity to move forward, and also the cost of production, the challenges of production are well understood. So I think that it gives us a leg up on the next opportunity. We'll be a first mover.
Absolutely. Moving along to another question here, and then we've got two more here. Then I have one for myself as well. But this one says, or asks, I should say, are all of your exploration properties amendable to the ISR method?
They probably mean amenable. And first off, I'd like to just make a comment in general on exploration. Uranium is the 8th most common element on Earth. It's very abundant. Your parameters are not so much finding a single deposit, as there are already I don't know, hundreds of millions of pounds that are discovered in known existing resources, some of which you can see on the screen now. But so I would say the question might better be posed of our existing projects: how many are amenable to ISR? And certainly everything we're looking at in Texas is, in New Mexico, Crown Point and Hosta Butte. Our 43101 resources are amenable to ISR. That's been established. Marquez and Juan Tafoya is partially amenable. We don't know exactly if the entire thing is or not, and that's something we'll be looking at to establish that. Although the grade's high enough to where you could consider conventional mining. Here again, we want to focus on ISR, so that's what we'll be looking at. Nose Rock, the biggest project of all for us, is ISR amenable. Tree Line, Ambrosia Lake, these are here again are something we'd need to look at a little more in detail, although here again I focus back on Paul's statement about Rio Algum just circulating mine water and recovering a good deal of uranium out of it, which certainly is a favorable indication that you might have some ISR amenability there. And so I think that in general most of them are, the vast majority of them are, and that's certainly what we're going to focus on. Some of our non-core assets, like the small projects in Utah and the breccia pipes in Arizona, are not amenable to in situ. But a subsidiary of ours, Group 11, is looking at alternate, and it's something we don't put any money into. It's privately funded at this point after the startup. And it'll be exploring alternate leaching methods. And so who knows, a breakthrough may occur there. But in terms of current knowledge, current status of science, most of ours are ISR amenable, and everything we'll be looking at in the future will be ISR amenable.
Perfect. Thank you. This next question, forgive me, I'm not sure the exact meaning of this. So, Dean, I believe your name was Greg, you said earlier, if you don't mind elaborating on this midway through them answering this question, but it says, what is the impact of upcoming financing? Now, I'm not sure if that's impact on share price or on your company, but if you were to think about it, what's the impact of having that extra money coming into your companies, right? I believe they are asking.
Well, and I'll go back to our capitalization page here quickly, just to answer it in I guess a very abstract way. It'll take us to 172 million shares outstanding. It'll take us to 196 million fully diluted with the half warrants. Those half warrants are at 60 cents. So in order to get to full dilution, it will bring in a pot full of money. The functional and realistic effect on the company is it will allow us to accomplish our 5 2021 goals. The 5 goals that we've set out by the year end 2021, we'll be able to accomplish that. The other thing it does is, in the meantime, is it gives us a very healthy treasury in the junior uranium industry, and one that, while it certainly is not adequate to go out and complete a corporate transaction in terms of consolidation, it's certainly enough to underpin that and give us a good starting point to bring in substantial finances to enable us to do that.
Beautiful. And you've touched both points of that. So feel free, Greg, if you had another element in there, but I believe you've touched both the financial part and what it does for the actual company as well.
Sure.
Another question here is, if someone is considering their first investment in the uranium space, can you give your opinion on why they would consider investing in enCore versus, say, investing in Cameco or Kazatomprom?
Well, I would. And here again, I'd call your attention to what's on the screen, and it's our staff and the people affiliated with our group. We literally have everything from A to Z covered in terms of the nuclear fuel cycle. For a company of our size, it's almost unheard of to have such complete coverage, and the wealth of expertise that we can rely on, from exploration to reclamation. And yes, you're going to get that with Cameco, but you aren't going to get the leverage with Cameco. If you reflect back to the last uranium industry, and I'm not saying we're going to repeat it, but it's certainly an indication. We weren't the only ones that had stratospheric price rises. But our stock went from 17 cents to $17. The predecessor company, Energy Metals, and during that same time frame, I don't recall what Cameco did, but I'm sure it wasn't much more than a 10-bagger. So you get your leverage on the smaller company because that's where your growth is. And just to illustrate that, if we were to add a 1.5 million or 2 million pound production facility to our company, it doubles our uranium production ability. If Cameco does that, it's an insignificant drop in the bucket. It doesn't do anything. So, I also advocate for an investor that has a big portfolio that it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of blue chip investment. That is, if you're in gold, buy a bit of Newmont or Agnico. If you're in uranium, buy a bit of Cameco. But you really are going to make your money on the smaller company that has the best leverage, and I think we're a shining bet on that with our staff and our asset package.
Absolutely, and good points made as well. Another question here. Every webinar today so far, we've always had, it's come out to November, so clearly there's definitely some things coming up that one part or the other could very much change a lot of sectors. Uranium is no different. How will a Democratic sweep impact the uranium mining sector should that happen? While I understand that support is bipartisan, there's also a not in my backyard, even with wind power, let alone uranium mining.
I'm going to take the first crack at this, Paul, just because it's one of my favorite subjects, and feel free to chime in with it. But there are being some major advancements in nuclear power on a global basis, aside from any individual company. One of them that almost everyone's heard about are the small modular reactors that Russia's already deploying, and that the U.S. and in fact Canada just offered some funding for that just in the last couple of weeks. So I think you're going to see that grow. I think the safety of those is significant, but there've been an awful lot of other safety elements. Each one of these disasters that we've had, while horrible, have led to a whole series of innovations and safety-related improvements, and that's no different in any other industry. Same way that airline safety has become far better than it was 50 years ago. Unfortunately, it comes through significant problems to get to those improvements, and the nuclear industry has gone through a few of those. But specifically, our namesake, enCore, which has no relation to us, that's owned by Westinghouse, has designed a meltdown-resistant or meltdown-proof fuel rod design, which has gone into commercial testing, one in Europe and one in the US this year. It's been under development for a number of years. Essentially what it does is it takes a fuel rod that's clad in the zirconium alloy, and instead of simply cladding a long, multiple foot long fuel rod, it segments it into 1-inch segments. and my number may be off, but it's roughly 1-inch segments where the ends of it are also coated in zirconium alloy. And what it does is it just reduces the velocity. It's basically like putting a governor on your car. It won't allow you to drive over 60 miles an hour. And what it does is it certainly, if not ensures, it certainly limits the potential for meltdown. And that sort of innovation, I think, is going to, once it's demonstrated, going to clearly make nuclear power a lot more acceptable. And hopefully we'll do away with the NIMBYs, and that would be my observation on the subject.
And thanks, Bill. I'll add that this is when we talk about the larger political side vision, and assuming that there's a suite or with the parties that are out of power at the moment, we've been through this before. The industry's been through it before, and so we work very hard on our environmental performance, et cetera, to basically, if there's not, when we talk about NIMBY issues, it's when there's problems. And if we can demonstrate that we can avoid those problems by acting as prudent operators, that goes a long way to getting support. So it's been my experience is that it becomes very local at that point. It's not a national thing, and you have to sell yourself to the local community to be able to get the community back. And it's not too dissimilar as we were talking about with the tribal governments. It'll be similar to that, where our operations are, where right now the Texas operations, where we're as part of this transaction, will be primarily focused on Democrat districts as well. So we have a good relationship. I already have a good relationship with Democrat leadership, not leadership, but to these representatives from these various areas. They stand to continue to be strong advocates for us. I'll also say in the Senate, there's been a lot of positive support with respect to the nuclear industry. When we talk about small modular reactors, those are going to create a whole different demand type scenario. It's not going to be, it'll be increasing demand because those have new fuel types, high assay, low enriched uranium, and there's going to be that technology has to be the enrichment technology is yet to be deployed in the U.S., but it will be deployed, and I see that as being something that's being supported by both sides of the aisle. So at existing facilities, existing locations, not new locations. So I think that, even if there's a complete change in government and after the election, I think that there's enough support that we'll be able to continue to do with our plans going forward. And I believe that the industry will, at least from a perspective of the nuclear power industry, will continue to be well supported. Will we see a whole bunch of new nuclear power plants being built beyond these small modular reactors? I don't know. But keep in mind is that the 2 reactors being built in Georgia were started during the Obama administration. And so I think that goes to show that things can happen, even though we see politics shifting all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a couple more questions here, but I think we might only be able to get through one more because we do need to end a few minutes before the next presentation. But it's coming from Dorian, and they ask, what needs to be done to be able to enter into long-term contracts with utilities?
Paul, I'll let you jump on that one.
Okay. Well, first thing, you've got to show that you've got you're going to be able to deliver on the commitment. So when you set a long-term contract with a utility, there's a commitment to deliver on a timely basis. That goes to the strength and confidence that they would see in your technical team and your management team. Another aspect is to be able to deliver production. So you've got to have a production facility that you can deliver from. And that's what we're focusing on, is that we expect to see these opportunities for contracting to come up in the near future. And we want to be able to deliver on those. That's why our transition to being a production-focused company is important to do now, and also to begin to start having those relationships with the utilities, which is something I've been continuing to work on throughout my career. Is to maintain a good relationship with the utility field buyers, but also to just keep networking with them, so that when those RFPs come out, we can be responsive to them. And granted, everything will have to be done in and how our companies, as we continue with this transition, where we stand. But now's the right time as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Well, there is only one more question. I don't want to leave Christopher alone. We'll need to do this in less than 2 minutes. But this question is asked: what are the specific factors you look at when deciding on an NMA deal? Are there any jurisdictions in the U.S. you won't do business in? For example, the Dakotas?
I'm going to spin that around and say we certainly have some preferred jurisdictions we would want to look at, and it all really fits into our three-phase approach to short-term, medium-term, and long-term. New Mexico being the long-term asset of the company, and Texas obviously being the short-term. It certainly leaves an obvious place that we're attracted, being Wyoming, and certainly a place, an expansion within Texas. I think, it would have to be, a compelling reason in terms of timing or operational efficiency or valuation to go outside of the Texas, Wyoming region right now. As I say, there's and I'm not saying that would be 100% true, but those are certainly the areas we want to work. It's a reasonably small, tight geographic area in the U.S. that you can, have central headquarters operating out of, and it's certainly not next door by any means, but it's not covering the whole country either. So I wouldn't categorically rule out anywhere else, but certainly our emphasis was going to be in Texas and Wyoming.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate very much the time you've taken today. For all of our investors who are in here watching this live, getting all these great questions in. I appreciate you taking the time here as well. And then lastly, from either Bill or Paul, if someone's to reach out to you, where would you want to guide them, to the website, to one of your emails, if they had any further questions?
Sure. If you just go to encoreenergycorp.com, and be careful, there's a double E at encoreenergy.com. You can or Google us and it'll take you to the website, and there's an info that'll take you directly into one of my mailboxes, and we'll get back to you. Can't guarantee it'll be the same day, but certainly within 2 or 3 days we'll get an answer back to every inquiry.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, once again, thank you very much, and I hope everyone enjoyed. We'll be moving on to our next webinar in just a moment here. Gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your day today.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending.
Yes, thanks.
Absolutely. Take care now.